So in this video, I want to go into detail about some of the things that we have been doing to stay cool while living off-grid in this remote cabin in the high desert of New Mexico. And shocker, it gets pretty hot. In the desert 2 days ago, we hit almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the high. It's about 38 degrees Celsius, I believe. For those of you guys watching in Canada and from overseas, I appreciate y'all. And that's pretty hot. We do not have air conditioning in here. We have a very small solar setup, not enough to power any sort of cooling system or anything like that. In fact, we don't even have running water in here. But we have learned a few things to help try to stay comfortable, or at least somewhat comfortable during these really hot summer days, and I want to share them with you guys in this video. Okay, so thing number one is not really something that you can actively do to stay cool while living off-grid, but it is something that's pretty important to think about, especially if you're considering moving to a wonderful, harsh environment like this, like a crazy person, and that is to really think about your structure, whether it's a cabin like this, or a tiny home, or even a trailer, an RV, even a van. There are a lot of things to think about. Thing number one, or I guess thing number 1A to consider, is the position of the structure. When we put the tiny house here, we tried to consider a couple of important things. The first one being where the wind tends to come from out here. For us, the wind is almost always coming from the west or sometimes the northwest. That's the prevailing wind direction. So we wanted to make sure that that big window was facing where the wind is coming from so that we could open it up and get a nice cross breeze all the way through the tiny house. The second thing to consider, which actually might be the most important, is the position of the sun. On this side of the house, you might notice that there are no windows, and that also works to our advantage. When the sun is coming up from the east over this mountain and then comes up overhead during the summer months, I've noticed, at least over the past few weeks, that it stays substantially cooler inside the tiny house in the mornings. I'll be in there working on converting the interior, and it'll stay cooler than it does in the cabin. It gets quite a bit warmer in the cabin during the morning hours, and I think that is primarily because these walls are pretty well insulated and there are very few windows on this side of the tiny house. In the wintertime, it might actually end up being quite a bit colder in there. The cabin heats up really nicely because of the position of the windows, but at least in the summer, it's noticeably more comfortable. So thing number 1B is considering what your structure is made of. Over the past couple of months, we have had the pleasure of getting to know some of our neighbors out here, many of whom have been living off-grid in the desert like this for the past 30 or 40 years. They've all built their houses themselves from scratch, and they have one thing in common. They have all used an adobe building method to build their houses. They're all adobe. They're super well insulated. They have these walls that are like this thick. They're stuffed with all kind of mud and hay, and they stay very cool in the summertime. It's like living in a cave. Certainly helps to have something that fits the environment extremely well, and it's something to think about if you're starting from scratch. 1C is pretty self-explanatory. It's the size of your structure or your home. The tiny house is a heck of a lot easier to cool than the cabin. I can get into the tiny house, be working in there in the middle of the day. All I have to do is open up 2 or 3 windows and it's instantly noticeably cooler in there. Whereas with the cabin, because it is about 2 or 3 times the size of the tiny house, it takes a little bit longer. 1D is planning for an outdoor shaded area. This back porch on the cabin is wonderful. 90% of the day it is in the shade. Of course, right now the sun's going down and the sun is beating right on me. But most of the time it's in the shade, and it's a pretty good place to go sit and take refuge from the heat of the day, especially in the summertime. So having a shaded outdoor area is definitely something to consider. And then I think 1E, the last thing to consider as part of the, when you're thinking about your structure, if you are going to be moving to an off-grid area like this, would be to consider what your windows are made of, and the thickness of your windows, the heat of the day. When you put your hand up against the windows in the cabin, they're quite a bit older and they are noticeably hotter to the touch. Whereas the tiny house, I've noticed that those windows are a little bit newer, and I think they're also tinted, So you go to touch them and they're thicker. You don't really feel the heat nearly as much as you would with the cabin windows. Just something to think about. Modern technology, nicer windows are going to make things noticeably cooler inside your space. Okay, moving right along to point number 2, and that is active temperature management. This is something that we have kind of picked up from talking to our neighbors and getting to know our neighbors a little bit over the past couple of months. Something that they have sort of got down to a science after living off grid like this for so long. So what I mean by active temperature management is basically like trying to create our own natural air conditioning. The way to do that is to make sure that the curtains are closed at the right times throughout the day to keep the heat of the sun out, and then also to make sure that we open up certain windows and certain doors to let the breeze in during certain times of the day. So, for example, in the mornings, this is Shannon's desk right here. It tends to get very, very hot at her desk come like 10, 11 a.m. as the sun is beating on that window, but we find that if we close the curtains, it helps to keep things cooler. Not 100% cooler. We are going to be getting some much nicer blackout curtains in the near future. I think Shannon actually ordered one specifically for this window so that she doesn't melt while she's working in the mornings. But, things like that. Keeping those curtains closed, and then as the sun passes, you can open up the curtains. I tend to not do that because I don't really mind just sitting in a cave all day. But, Shannon will open up the windows as the sun gets past to let the light in and make it more comfortable to be in here all day. The second part of temperature management is helping to get a breeze through here to cool things off. I do notice that in the evenings it's very helpful to open the doors. In fact, I'm going to open this one now because it is quite toasty in here. Get this door open, get the other one open, and there's a nice cross breeze that'll come through here, and it will work to cool things off. I do believe that these doors and the windows in this cabin were placed in the positions that they're in very strategically. So you'll notice that the doors are directly across from each other, and you have one door open, you open the other door, and it is instantly cooler in here immediately. It's pretty incredible what it does. It basically, like I said, is like a natural air conditioning. You'll also notice that there are no windows on this side of the house, and I believe that is by design. We're very grateful that the previous owner thought about these things when she was building this, and it definitely makes it more manageable in here. The hottest time of the day is around 4, 5 o'clock in the summer. In the desert, the sun is high in the sky, it is to the west, and if there were bigger windows on this side of the house, it's probably safe to assume that it would be less pleasant in here. Thing number 3 that I find really helps to cool you off in the afternoon after a hot day like this is just taking a quick shower and rinsing off. It's very refreshing, and I think I'm going to do that now. So much better. That shower works wonders. I put that thing in the sun for a couple of hours. Temperature gets perfect in there, and it makes it so that showering like this is a heck of a lot more comfortable. When you're trying to do that with cold water, it's not very pleasant. Number 4 is using the fridge, and particularly the freezer, to your advantage. We are fortunate enough to have a small solar system in here, like I said earlier, and it runs this fridge very nicely. And what I mean by using the freezer is not like sticking your head in there to try to cool off, although admittedly I have definitely done that since moving out here. We have these ice packs. You can take these and just put them on your neck before bed, maybe 20 minutes or so, and they are especially helpful to cool you off on the evenings when the weather is just not cooperating. There are some nights, there have been a couple of nights where the wind hasn't really picked up, so you don't really get any breeze through here, so it just keeps that like stale hot air in here, and it's nice to be able to have something like this as an alternative. Shannon also suggested that we get popsicles recently, which might sound like a silly thing, just to have ice cream and popsicles on a hot day, but I gotta say, it's pretty nice. I've never been a huge fan of popsicles. I don't really like them that much, but they've been pretty wonderful. Like having like a nice lime popsicle when it's like 100 degrees outside and you don't have air conditioning can work wonders. I guess the next point sort of relates to the fridge and the freezer, and that's just staying hydrated I've realized out here, especially with the dryness of the desert, that it is very important to drink as much water as possible. You'll be out there and you won't even really notice yourself sweating because it just evaporates immediately. It is so dry and hot out here. So we go through these 5-gallon jugs of water extremely quickly, especially when Shannon is here. By the way, Shannon is out of town now. She's currently in San Francisco for work. It's kind of funny. She left me here last time for 2 weeks, and we had some of the most snow that we had the whole time we've been here. Had like a couple of different snowstorms. It was crazy. And then the second time that she leaves me here, it's the hottest that it's been. She's picking a couple of good times to get out of here and go to the mild climate of San Francisco. But anyways, staying hydrated has been something that we've been really focusing on, drinking as much water as possible. We also keep some sparkling waters in there as well to switch it up. And I guess the final point that I want to make in this video is just adapting. A lot of folks might think like, oh, I could never live without air conditioning. I'd never be able to get used to it. And it makes sense. Like, if you're used to air conditioning and you come out here in the middle of the summer and try to survive, like, it's going to take a little while for your body to get used to that. But eventually, it does. Like, I have adapted to the dry climate out here. I definitely feel a lot more comfortable than I did when we first got out here. And I think that people just are pretty resilient. Like, we're going to take the discomforts of a situation and get used to them slowly over time. Good example of that is one of my favorite places that I lived for quite a long time in New Orleans, where you have one of the probably most oppressively humid environments and hot, sticky environments that you could possibly have. So people lived there for hundreds of years before the invention of air conditioning, right? And they did a lot of the things that I guess I talked about in this video in terms of how they positioned their houses and, you know, caught prevailing winds to try to cool things off in the afternoons and everything like that. I think I would take the dry heat of the desert, though, over the humidity of the deep south. But, you know, I guess to each their own, and there are definitely ways to live without air conditioning. And hope this video was helpful for some of you guys if you are thinking about living off grid. I'm sure there are a couple of things that I missed in this video and things that we're going to learn into the future as we continue to acclimate to living out here off grid in the desert. It's been really nice to be able to meet our neighbors, like I've already said in this video, and just to learn from their experiences and hear about how the area has changed in recent years and how it will continue to change into the future, and sort of speculate on how things are going to change. I don't know, it's something that we're really enjoying at this point, and just trying to build this little homestead out here in an otherwise very harsh environment. We look forward to continuing to create these videos every week. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Please leave a like and leave a comment below. I love hearing from you guys. Definitely helps out the channel, and I'm really enjoying making these videos about living off grid like this. More to come. Plenty of things to talk about. Maybe I can make a video about these flies that keep flying into my ears right now. I don't know if they like the shampoo or if it's the fact that the wind died or what, but I think it's time for me to go inside. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to y'all in the next one.